conversations once the meeting begins. Welcome to meeting number 75 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid, but everybody is here in person, and it's great to see that. You can choose the official language of your choice, of course, with our devices in front of us. But do keep the earphone away from the microphone so that our interpreters don't receive feedback that causes injuries to their hearing. And direct comments through the chair. It's easier to do the opening when everybody's here. So it's my pleasure now to welcome the Office of the Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Mona Nemer, the Chief Science Advisor of Canada, as well as Dr. Geneviève Tanguay, the Vice Chief Science Advisor for Canada. It's tremendous to have some time today with you and have a discussion on Canada's science within our committee. Of course, that's where our focus is every week. So it would be great to hear from you. Dr. Nemer, you have 5 minutes to get us started.
Bien, bonjour tout le monde et bonjour.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. Thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to talk to the members of the committee about science and research in this country. I would also like to thank the committee for the important work you do.
I really want to say how much your reports are appreciated, thoughtful, and are keeping science in the limelight and on the radar in the country. Since my previous appearance before the committee, my office has been busy on a number of files while continuing to provide independent advice to government on vital issues for Canadians. With the support and participation of the science community, we have helped to define a vision for a new climate science strategy and identified emerging challenges and opportunities in Arctic and subarctic scientific activity. We have advised on and will continue to inform important decisions on the use of science in all aspects of emergency management, from preparedness to response to recovery. Among other activities, we are providing advice on the long-term health and socio-economic effects of the pandemic, as well as the environmental impact of some major infrastructure projects. Conscient du besoin croissant en
Recognizing the growing need for science in government and the accelerating pace of technological change, we have launched a series of studies on the federal science community. These aim to ensure that the best science and scientific advice inform all government decision-making. In so doing, we are helping to maintain and strengthen the general public's trust in science and democratic institutions. That's why we remain committed to advancing scientific integrity policy, open science, and safe science, values which are fundamental in our international partnerships. We have built effective research alliances with our international counterparts, as evidenced by the establishment of a Canada-France bilateral committee and Canada's accession to the European Union's Horizon Europe program as an associate member.
Accomplishments are built on the contributions and excellence of our extraordinary science community, and I'm eternally thankful for their support and engagement. They have helped to grow Canada's scientific landscape and made important contributions towards solving some of the most pressing global challenges. Canadians can be very proud of their country's well-recognized science strengths. We have an outstanding research system that supports creative ideas, world-class infrastructure, multidisciplinary collaboration, and an inclusive science culture. But in order to fully utilize our assets and keep pace with our international peers, we need to be on top of the rapidly growing areas of science and technology that are advancing knowledge and attracting top talent around the world. The international landscape is diversifying, and there are more players than ever before vying for leadership. From quantum research and AI to biotechnology and gene therapy to the promise of fusion power and other clean technologies. These fields of research are advancing at an exponential rate, and at the same time, many of them are converging. The global science race is not just expanding, it is accelerating. And it is shaping tomorrow's economy and impacting communities. Staying in the game is essential, but will require focus and concerted efforts across sectors. Not only do we need to improve our support for Canadian research and researchers, but we need to better utilize the resources we already have and ensure that our research and development ecosystem is fit for the reality and demands of the foreseeable future. I trust we can all work together to safeguard our reputation of excellence in science and technology. It will directly impact our prosperity, national security, and international relations. Thank you again for the opportunity to exchange with you on the state of science and science advice in these important times.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your opening remarks, and we could dive into many of those, as I'm sure we will. We have a study coming up on the Arctic, and you mentioned that. We have studies on research funding that we're just about to undertake, or funding of universities. So it's great to have the time to talk. I want to thank Rosemary Falk for coming to our committee as a substitute, and Laurie Eadloot. It's great to have you here. And we'll now get started with our first round, 6 minutes each, starting with Corey Tucker from Conservatives.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mamer, when your office was set up in 2017, it was reported that it had a budget of $2 million. What's your annual budget now?
Mr. Chair, I believe our budget was increased. I'm not certain exactly what it is. I believe it's more around 3.5 million right now, but I can certainly provide the exact budget figure.
Please in writing. That much appreciated. And your salary. May I ask your salary?
I regret that I'm unable to give you my salary because I haven't looked at it recently. I can just say that I have an appropriate salary.
And on your salary, is there a bonus component to your compensation?
There is no bonus compensation for my salary, and I think that it was set up this way to ensure my independence.
So was there any increase in salary from last year to this year, though?
I believe I have received the cost of living increases that everyone else has received.
Do you know the percent or dollar amount?
I'm very sorry, I don't track these.
A financial report coming back to us, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So just a little bit alarming on what this budget, and we'll find out what the actual dollar amount is, but I wanted to dive into a little bit of the good work that you do, and we only had the annual report that's available is 2022. So that's 21 to 22 is available, 22 to 23 is not available, 23 to 24 is not available, and then our current year 24 to 25 is not available, I'm assuming. When do we expect these back annual reports to be filed?
Well, I think that the 2022-23 annual report is the latest report that was developed as I guess the calendar indicates, and it is done, and it's imminent. It's right now being translated.
Do you have like a target of how long it takes to produce these annual reports? Should we be expecting future ones to be 2 to 3 years behind, or?
Mr. Chair, I think that we're producing the annual reports to the best of our ability. We are a small team. We actually do not have an office that is dedicated to producing the annual reports as other organizations, departments, and agencies have. in the government. We appreciate that the annual reports are very important. We have promised to work in a transparent manner. Most of our activities are actually put out on our website in an ongoing basis. I'm not sure that we have fallen that far behind in our annual reports, except during the pandemic, where I hope that it's understood that our most pressing issue was to really provide the best advice to government, produce reports on the pandemic. So I appreciate the interest in our annual reports and promise that you will not be disappointed with the latest one.
And back to the organization, you said that it doesn't have the people or capacity to do these annual reports on time or in a shorter period of time. The full-time equivalents, or how many people actually work in your office, has it increased since 2017?
Mr. Chair, when I arrived, there was space. There was no one in it. We had actually two individuals provided to us on an interim basis to support actually setting up the office, which we have done since, and done, I think, in a reasonable, appropriate manner to set up and provide
Could we get a report on
provide
that?
our mandate. Right now,
We're going to run out of time here. I'm sorry.
Right now-
Just, could you, Chair? This
last
is my
sentence.
time, actually. I would request those answers in written form. I have a minute 10 left. In 2023, you attended the Trudeau Foundation final meeting for application nominees. In 2020, you attended the Trudeau Foundation Deputy Minister's Science Committee. Would you mind telling the committee more about your involvement in these organizations?
as a chief science advisor, like my homologues in the country and outside the country, including, for example, in Quebec, in the UK, in the US, we are expected to take part in the scientific life of the country. And my involvement with the Trudeau Foundation has been to chair the scientific review committee, and I have no other involvement than ensuring that the applications are reviewed properly and that on a meritorious basis, and that a list of nominations is submitted to the foundation.
Now we're going to go to the next round for Dr. Jasek, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Niemer, for coming to visit with us this morning. You may be aware that our committee recently concluded a study on how best to integrate, or I think we preferred the word braiding, traditional Indigenous observational knowledge into what we consider sort of more mainstream Western science. And I think we all found that extremely interesting. Could you describe how your office liaises in terms of science and research, post-secondary institutions, in what is an important aspect for our country, for Canada, to understand what our Indigenous people know? Have you had a role in liaising between the various institutions, etc.?
Well, thank you for this question. This is a very important topic for the country and for my office. We've been involved in facilitating the weaving of Indigenous knowledge with Western science knowledge in many areas. And to help us do this, we actually have a researcher in residence in my office, who's an Indigenous scholar from the University of Manitoba. And this was actually following requests also from the post-secondary institutions to help in terms of facilitating this, but also in the handling of Indigenous knowledge in terms of the for example, the open science. How do we, can we manage this? How can we use it as evidence in impact assessment? So we're involved in this. We have also worked collaboratively with other departments to set up iSTEM, which is Indigenous in STEM. It's a pan-government organization that actually aims to facilitate the recruitment of Indigenous scientists and scholars, but also the understanding of cultural sensitive issues and how best to liaise with the community and so on. We've had a number of roundtables as well with Indigenous leaders, but as part of the CRCC, the Canada Research Coordinating Committee, we have also done a number of things around Indigenous research. We've set up a Indigenous circle, and just last week, my colleague organized together with the U.S. Scientists at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, actually a workshop specifically on the use of Indigenous knowledge and the cultural sensitivities around this. So we're very much conscious of the important the important role that Indigenous knowledge can play, and we want to make sure that that there are harmonious approaches to it across the country that are both culturally sensitive and respectful of the communities.
Thank you so much for that. So, as part of your experience to date as Canada's Chief Science Advisor, do you have any recommendations on how to improve coordination between federal, post-secondary, and industry science and research? Are there lessons learned where you can see where we could make some recommendations as a committee to improve that type of coordination?
Again, thank you very much for the question. I think that the coordination of research is critical for the country, with increasing pressure on precious resources. I think we really need to find ways to work better together. I would say, and I'm not saying that this is not happening, but it could happen. I think even more. I would say that to start developing a national science, technology, and innovation strategy would be something that would be, I think, very, very helpful for the country. It will set our ambitions. It will set our objectives, and then everybody can play their own part and role within this. So there are no surprises and there is no fragmentation, so that we're not spreading the wealth, thin, but we have actually something to show for at the end of the day. So that's one of the approaches I think that would be quite beneficial.
And would you be prepared as the Chief Science Advisor to sort of lead that movement towards a national strategy?
I would be honored and proud to do so if asked. My counterpart in Australia is in the midst of doing this, and it would be an appropriate actually role for the Chief Science Advisor, but to lead it, of course, with great consultations and collaboration with everyone in the country.
Thank you. Let's now to Monsieur Blanchard-Choquin for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je salue.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, witnesses. It's a pleasure to see you, Dr. Nimmer. In 2015, the government, Justin Trudeau's government, promised to ensure that Canada would once again be competitive on the world scale when it comes to science. What do you believe is your take on the situation 9 years later, on the actions that the government has taken to ensure that Canada is back on the world stage at a competitive scale? Chair, this question is quite interesting. I'm talking here about Canada's leadership at the international level. As I've said in my opening remarks, the prosperity of our country going forward depends on it. I would like to remind the committee that I am a scientific advisor. I am not in command of what the government does or does not do. What I can do, however, is comment on the data and what has been done. The government has continued to invest in science, research, and innovation in various ways. The challenge is that other countries, however, have invested more. So continuing on the same course would not guarantee our position as a leader going forward. The only place you can go when you're in the first on the list is backwards. I would say, in my humble opinion, Canada has not accelerated its pace with regard to technological and scientific development in this way since the end of the Second World War. So these are exceptional times and warrant exceptional measures. We need to double our investments in research in order to ensure that Canada maintain its standing, and this is very important indeed. Dr. Nimmer, thank you for your answer. What are the performance indicators that would allow us to note whether Canada is competitive on the world scale when it comes to science? There are a number of indicators we can look at. We can look at research investments by GDP. The OECD publishes this kind of data. And in these kind of studies, there are many variables. First of all is GDP. There is a need to invest more as a share of GDP. What's also important, though, is to look at how the investments are the sum of all investments by governments at a provincial level, federal level, universities, post-secondary institutions, but also industry players. This kind of analysis is out there. We've seen it, and the studies show that Canada has not remained stable in its share of funding in the last few years. So there's a need for increased funding across the board. Continuing on, Dr. Nimmer, what would you advise the government in the next budget with regard to investments to support Canada's scientific landscape? Chair, I would just simply like to say I was very clear earlier. I cannot proactively provide advice to the government. I was, however, very clear in many interviews or communications with the public. I have said that the government needs to increase its investments in research. It needs to support researchers better, especially when it comes to young researchers and those pursuing postdoctoral positions. Since I was appointed, I spoke of my support for the recommendations included in the Naylor report, and I don't think that I've changed my mind since. The Naylor report is from 2017. The government appointed a advisory board to look at the situation anew, and this will happen in March. I am an optimist, as always. You know, I asked a number of questions to the person who is responsible for science and scientific development at ICED, and he told us that there are no plans to implement the 21 recommendations of the Bouchard report. What are the pieces of advice you've given to the government that came from this independent committee? And I might remind you that this committee was silenced in a few ways by the government. There are many recommendations from the Bouchard report and Naylor report that I'm looking at. When there are a number of studies and recommendations from various committees that come out after 5 years and make similar recommendations, at one point it becomes important to actually do something. Now, if you're asking if I was with regard to what kind of answers should be given going forward, the answer is yes.
The testimonies coming forward, I'm thinking a lot of this can be used in our future studies, including the study that Monsieur Blanchet-Choquin has brought forward to the committee that will be beginning shortly. Ms. Idlut, welcome again, and your 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mona, for sharing your expertise at this committee. I'm going to ask you two kind of easy questions first and then probably ask you a bit more difficult questions. This committee is currently conducting a study of how to integrate Indigenous traditional knowledge and science into government policy development. Has your office considered how to do this?
My office has considered doing this. In fact, we are reviewing right now our science integrity policy, which we put forward back in 2018 and has been adopted by all the science-based department in the government. And we're reviewing it to precisely incorporate two additional development or important items that we didn't have answers for before. One is the use of indigenous knowledge in policy, in science advice. And the other one is actually about the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence in research and reports. So yes, we are doing this.
Thank you, and I did also appreciate the responses that you had for another MP regarding the use of Indigenous traditional knowledge. What advice would you have for the government on how to combine or braid these two knowledge systems into government policy?
I think it's it's really important to for the public, and of course the elected officials are part of the public, to appreciate what indigenous knowledge is. I'm not certain that it is well understood by many people, so I think that we need a lot of engagement and some sensitization or education, if I can say. Because if I give the example of the use of indigenous knowledge in the north to predict migration of animal species or weather events or production of food and others, I think these are most definitely things that follow what we refer to as the scientific method, in the sense that they are observations that lead to conclusions, and they are repeated. They're verifiable. They've been repeated over and over. So I think this is really very important to do this. But I think that we need to engage in continuous dialogue between the different communities in an ongoing way. So, and we're doing this also in our international engagement with other countries, sensitizing them to the fact that we do need to incorporate and be conscious of the indigenous knowledge, indigenous communities' perspectives in many of our research. So I think Canada can also be a leader internationally on this.
On to a bit more of a difficult question. I do appreciate your responses very much. It shows that you've learned what the realities are to some extent of the experience of Indigenous peoples and what Canada's genocidal policies continue to do to Indigenous peoples. A very specific example is that scientists and the knowledge of science seems to be considered as a higher level as compared to indigenous traditional knowledge. So my question to you is what kind of approach do you have when those two different forms of knowledge are in conflict with each other? And how would you make sure that there is appropriate reconciliation so that indigenous traditional knowledge is being the one that is used to help guide decision making?
Thank you for this, difficult and complex question. I like to believe that the two knowledge systems can work hand in hand, and there is no contradiction between them once people have a better appreciation and understanding of what each brings to the equation. So I prefer to think that we can do it this way, but we have a long ways to go. I'll be very, very honest with you on this. But difficult doesn't mean impossible. It just means that we have to work harder.
I think that I'm running out of time, so I do hope that when you're doing your reports that you're continuing to support indigenous traditional knowledge, that some of that discussion revolves around how to make sure that indigenous traditional knowledge is considered on par with science, so that decisions that impact indigenous peoples is based on both knowledge sets rather than one over the other.
About 10 seconds.
Thank you.
Ms. Udley?
Thank you. I think that, we take this very seriously and at heart, and I can only commit to continuing to work. We're using every opportunity, we can to do our bit. I sincerely believe in the, place and role of science in reconciliation, and can only promise to continue working towards that.
Thank you. Thank you. Now for the second round, we have Ben Lobb for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. It's Dr. Niemeyer, correct? Yes, sorry, I wanted to make sure I addressed you correctly there. I'm not going to go on about the annual reports too much, but I just, right in the mandate, it says that you shall report an annual report to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Science every year. Has anybody ever asked you, hey, where's my reports for the last 3 years or 2 years? Does anybody contacted your office and asked you about that?
We keep, we keep the Prime Minister and the Minister of Science informed of all our work. And for example, you mentioned that the mandate requires that we report on the state of the science workforce, for example, and the state of the science infrastructure. Which, we have done. We just put out an elaborate report, actually, in December on the science workforce. So it's not like they're waiting for this one report to find out what we're doing or what recommendations are.
So would you consider that document that you presented to the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office at the end of the year is that a public document, or is that a kind of like a cabinet briefing note to the Prime Minister's office?
We have put together actually a substantive report on the science workforce. It's on our website, and
Okay.
It was covered by the media as well. So it is very much a public report.
One other question I wanted to ask you about is the independence. And so as the Chief Science Advisor, do you get to pick what you want to investigate, or are you kind of, nudged and said, hey, you might want to consider this? I noticed you'd done an interview, and the Minister of Health had asked you to conduct the long COVID study. So I'm kind of wondering on the independent, and it's not critiquing you at all, I'm just saying, do you feel like you have the independence to study what you want, or are you advised by a cabinet minister what you should study?
Thank you for this question. I get asked this very, very often, so it's very pertinent and very important to understand actually the role, because we do both anyway. The government can ask us for advice, and sometimes it requires a report, sometimes it requires a small study or roundtable, but we are absolutely free to decide on issues of importance that we want to carry out. And the long COVID is a good example because we had been tracking the issue of the long COVID for a while, and had discussions with the Minister of Health about it, who then felt that something substantive needed to happen that is beyond the Department of Health, because of course the Department of Health provides this. And I mean, there are a number of things that we do. We provide science notes.
Can I just interrupt you for one
yes.
second? When you're asked by the Health Department to do a study on long COVID, are you provided an additional budget, or is the expectation that you'll do that out of your own internal budget?
The expectation is that we do it from our own internal budget. We don't get any extra funding for any of the extra work.
Can I ask you one other question? When you're putting together your plan to study on the recommendation of the health minister on long COVID, and I know that you are a well-respected molecular cardiovascular researcher, does the idea ever come up, well, if we're going to look at long COVID, should we also look at maybe if there's any potential harms that the vaccine did to people? Because we see that in the news all the time. Do you have the independence to say, well, I'd study this, but I think if we're going to look at everything to do with COVID, we should look at all of this?
We absolutely have, the ability to do this, and this is exactly how it happens. Even when the government asks us for advice on the use of science in a particular case, then we assemble our own experts. We don't need any vetting from the government. We don't seek any vetting from the government. We do all the work independently, and we provide the report. And again, depending on how many of these we do, you can appreciate.
Can I ask one quick last question before you embark?
Okay.
Am I at? Okay.
Yeah, maybe you could share time within your group, but really good questions and a good discussion. I guess it is something that we need to understand the governance, and so thank you for that. To Ms. Diab for
Thank
6
you.
minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr.
Or for 5
Chair.
minutes, sorry.
No worries, we'll take 6.
No, 5.
Dr. Nimmer, thank you very much. It's wonderful to see you again, and thank you for coming back to our committee. I know you gave us, you appeared once before as a witness, and let me thank you again for your contributions to our foundational first study and for the insight you shared with us at the time when we studied graduate scholarships in June. Personally, I think having a chief science advisor for our country is a big deal. Canadians should know more about the role and the work that you've done and are doing, and should be able to see and feel that scientific inquiry is valued and put to use in our country and in our policy making. So for the benefit of those watching us at home throughout the country, your current post dates back to 2017. But you come to this post with a long record of contributions to science in Canada. I know you've trained more than 100 graduate and postgraduate students in your career and have mentored and counseled many, many more. You're a leader in the field of molecular cardiology and have helped make great strides on heart health with your research. You've also published over 200 academic publications and made significant contributions to Canada's response to the pandemic. So this is work that not only keeps people safe and supports their health, but gives hope. Hope that science can be put to use to better our world. In fact, I think where we met you in the last couple of years was with Science Meets Parliament. The number of students that have been coming here and being introduced to the parliamentary work that we do is so crucial in their fields, but also in our fields as parliamentarians, so we can better connect. And I just want to take this opportunity, so it does not go unpassed by me, to say that it's very nice for me personally to see a fellow Lebanese Canadian woman in your position making a big difference in Canada. So thank you. Now, as Chief Science Advisor, your work is broad. Your office provides advice to government on improving support for quality research and enhancing the science advisory function within government. including processes for science-informed decisions. I've got a question with the time that I have. I just felt it was important to put that on record because it really makes a big difference. In the age of disinformation, science has become political. Can you talk to the committee about the impact of disinformation on science? How can we combat it? And what can your office do to safeguard science? And what is the role that your office can play in protecting science in Canada? Pretty broad question, but I'm going to leave the opportunity for you to enlighten us on that, please.
2 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm humbled by your generous comments. It's a privilege to serve the country and to continue to serve science. Disinformation and misinformation are issues that we all take very seriously. I think that they're not only a threat to science, they're a threat to democracy. They're a threat to how people carry out their lives. And one thing for sure, we can't always be sort of on the reactive side, trying to correct what's out there that is not exact. We need to be proactive. And I think that transparency is our best ally. Personally, I think that we need to enhance science knowledge in the country, so that people can tell by themselves what are appropriate sources, evidences, and so on. But I think that we need to involve the public in our deliberations, and I salute the report that you put out in terms of the citizen science. It's really with this in mind that we work, that we engage continuously with the public, but also that we take on specific projects. And your colleague asked me, which like if we take on topics ourselves, and one of the topics that we have decided to actually report to produce is called Canada Sky. It's about unidentified aerial phenomena. And the reason we have taken this on is not because we believe one way or the other about extraterrestrial or anything like that. It's because we believe that it's important that we have a scientific approach and transparency to how we assemble the information. So precisely to avoid any conspiracy theories and so on and so forth. So this is just like one example.
Thank you. We're at time. I appreciate that. Sorry to cut you off, but we are over. Monsieur Blanchet-Choquat, for 2 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame...
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Nimmer, here's an important question for you. Well, actually not for you. Or rather, what is the priority in the organizational change in order to support Canada's scientific landscape? I'm not entirely sure I understood the question. I'm going to ask it again. What should Canada's priority be if it wishes to be competitive at the international stage? What would that priority be if it wishes to be competitive? If I look at what's going on in Quebec, for instance, they have restructured their system for funding research. They have supported interdisciplinary research, and they are encouraging a one voice for all model when it comes to researchers in Quebec. I've mentioned this before. It is important to have a strategy for science and innovation. Canada needs to have the tools and funding that is needed to develop and implement that strategy. Canada also needs a system that can support ambition throughout collaboration with the provinces and institutions, etc. I believe that all of the above is fundamental. And I can only hope that scientific advice can also be buttressed. What are the consequences if we don't? Over the course of the pandemic, we've seen the consequences of not having the right science, technology, and innovation capacity to meet the needs of our country. If we need to get that tech elsewhere, then we'll be waiting a long time. Canada will not be able to have a role in this scenario to be able to contribute to the deployment of these technologies, and that could affect us tremendously. Given the increased and significant competition by other countries who have focused on scientific and development, Canada risks falling even further behind.
I thought that was a good point you were developing, so thank you for that. Ms. Ziegler for 2.5 minutes, please.
Goeie Namik, and thank you. Just to very quickly follow up on my last line of questioning regarding Indigenous traditional knowledge and how some of that knowledge conflicts with science. Just a specific example I know in Nunavut is around polar bears. Inuit had managed to conserve polar bears while hunting them and being sustained by them, and because of science, the knowledge behind science, I understand is increasing, but Inuit knowledge is still being ignored to a greater extent, resulting in what Inuit are saying now with the overpopulation of these predators, where there has to be no choice but to kill them because of the quota system. So I just wanted to follow up to say how important your words were to say that Indigenous traditional knowledge needs to be used because it is science. And just to really push with this committee when you're considering science and how traditional knowledge could be used to guide decision making, there are very direct impacts when Indigenous traditional knowledge is not being used. To get to my conclusion, I wanted to ask you about what your experience is with the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, whether you know if there are any calls to action around science.
Thank you very much for this. Yes, there are actions around research and the participation of Indigenous people in research about them and research that affects them as well. And that's something that I very much support. And like I said, with the Canada Research Coordinating Committee, we do have an Indigenous circle that is informing our directions in terms of research programs and working with Indigenous leadership on this. If I may, I would also like to take the opportunity to mention that the example that you've given about polar bears, predators, exists actually with other species as well, and is really very important. And it's, I think, a perfect example where Western science can actually, we need to incorporate climate change, right? So I think that can be done in terms of the modeling, using the tools of Western science, but also the entrant and the elements that we put in those equations have to also come from traditional knowledge.
Thank you, and thank you for that line of questioning. And the committee is getting more and more into Indigenous traditional knowledge. The study we just completed has been a real eye-opener for a lot of us, so very important. Mr. Tucker, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And just to pick up on where my colleague Ben Lobb was talking about some of your studying, You've identified the UFOs study that you're doing right now as something that you initiated on your own. What are the other studies that you're conducting right now?
We have a number of studies that we're conducting right now, and happy to provide a list if should I forget some. But we are doing a study on the use of science in emergency preparedness with recommendations based on what we've seen from the lessons learned from the pandemics.
Please submit that list. But on that study on COVID that you're doing, are you questioning some of the things that we did as a country? That there's some things we did well and some things that we had given an opportunity to do again. Is that part of it?
Yes, in the sense that we're not concerned with operations. We're really concerned with the science and the science advice, and particularly for emergencies. And yes, there are things that we did well, and there are things that we can improve, especially in emergencies that will last for a long time. We need to have sustainable systems. So this is the kind of things that we're looking at.
And there was reports recently last month about the negative impact of our policies around schools and the belief that locking down and limiting school use was negative to that generation. Will you be studying that?
This is really a very interesting question, because during the pandemic, we actually did a study on COVID and children. And if I recall well, we had actually made a number of recommendations, including keeping schools open for children's, because we have to weigh the health and the educational outcome and the psychological and mental health and, you know, the societal things. And we had been wondering whether we should be revisiting some of the reports that we did, which were used, of course, on the knowledge that was, up to date at that time. So that's an interesting question you're asking me.
Can you forward that study to our committee afterwards with the other questions?
I beg your pardon?
Could you forward me that study that you did?
Yes,
mid-COVID
absolutely.
about
Absolutely, with pleasure. It's on our website, absolutely.
And you spoke earlier about briefing different individuals. When was the last time you, in person, briefed the Minister of Science? Month.
Well, I'll have to check my calendar because, I actually communicate with him very much by text and phone. So I will have to check when I met with him in person last time.
Please do, and it's good that you're texting ministers and different, hopefully, questions they have and answers that you might be providing. Not wanting the date, but when was we'll make it as broad as possible. When was the last time you were in the same room as the Prime Minister? What month? It doesn't have to be the date, just like this year, last year, the year before.
I mean, this year we're only 2 months in, so it's not this year. That much I can say. I think that as much as I in person like now is fantastic. But of course, during the pandemic, these were not possible, and for a while after the pandemic, we continued to have virtual meetings and so on. So I'll be happy to provide the exact date, but I just want to reassure the member of the committee that I am in touch with the Prime Minister's office, and they do respond to our inquiry. We provide them with recommendations, and they do acknowledge receiving them.
Did you provide any advice on the RiveCam scam?
Mr. Chair, I'm a science, advisor, and I appreciate that science, can be everywhere. But no, I don't provide advice on everything. And in this particular instance, I had no.
So just to clarify, there's no questions if this was scientifically needed to your office, or if the research showed that something like this is needed. There's no communication from the government to you on anything to do with the RiveCam.
We're at time, so a
There are
brief
no-
answer.
There are no communications
Yeah,
on
okay,
this.
thank you. Thank you, and now to round up this second round with Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being with us here today. So, to Dr. Nimmer, much of the last annual report centered around COVID-19, and as you're presumably shifting your focus away from this, and as we learn to live with COVID, what are the current and future issues that preoccupy you in your office?
Thank you very much. We've been quite preoccupied and active actually on several areas of science for climate science and biodiversity science. So we've worked closely with the Department of Environment Climate Change Canada and supported them in the development of their climate science strategy that was released, I think, a week ago. We continue to be working with them on the biodiversity science front, and I just like to say that, you know, science is not only about identifying the cause of the problem, but also about finding potential or proposing potential solutions, about monitoring progress, and about implementation science as well. So we do quite a bit there. We're right now also updating the guide on science advice for the federal government that dates back to 1999. We continue our work on the open science, and specifically right now we're looking at a framework for the research data. So that's something that is very important, among other.
Great, thank you for that. So I understand that you have a youth council. Can you talk to us about your youth council, and what are the issues that are top of mind for our young people, and how are they contributing to the work done by your office?
Again, thank you very much for this question. We have the second cohort of the Youth Council. The first cohort, you may have noted that they actually provided a substantive report on their vision for science in the country, and I think it's really important to engage the youth. The new Youth Council, so usually we involve them with the different reports that we're doing, but they also have a project, they carry out a project on their own. I believe the new cohort is actually interested in indigenous knowledge, and I can't remember what other thing they have actually decided to do, but I would encourage you actually maybe to have them one day. They're really a great bunch of very enthusiastic, smart, caring individuals.
What's the age range on your youth council?
When we recruit them, if I'm not mistaken, it's 18 to 30 years old. So we don't. So it's not about what they're doing, whether they're students or not. It's really the age range.
So how do you go about recruiting them? How is the reach out done?
It's an open call. And we get a lot of actually help from a lot of the youth organizations, the universities, the institutions. The institutions are very proud when one of their student is actually in the selected on the committee. So we actually get a lot of help. The first time we had over 1,000 applications. The second time we decided to make it a little bit sort of harder.
And do you ensure that there's broad range from across Canada so that it's not just one region that participates?
Yes, absolutely. We ensure that we have gender balance, that it's representative of the entire country. We have indigenous people on the committee. We have people from visible communities. And if I may, this is the approach that we have for all our committees, not only for the youth committee. So we really strive to have as much diversity and inclusivity as possible.
Okay, is that it? Okay, thank you so much. That's interesting.
Yes, thank you. And we're now going to go into the second half of the meeting, and by the routine motions, we'll be following the same format as this last round with 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 2.5, 2.5, 5, 5. Starting off with Mr. Soroka with 5 minutes, please.
Wouldn't it be 6 minutes?
No, the routine motions,
Okay.
well, the committee can decide to change that, but
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nimmer, for coming today. Were you or your office asked for advice on the policy on sensitive technology research and the related banned entities list?
We have been involved with the government in the general area of research security and the identification of sensitive technologies. But that's the extent of our really involvement. We haven't gone any further.
So then, that was the nature of your advice. I should say, what was the nature of your advice then to them?
Our advice was around the identification of sensitive technologies, about engaging with the institutions, the post-secondary institution, about the importance of harmonizing our approach with our allies and similarly minded countries.
Okay. Do you feel that your advice was reflected in the policy and the banned entities list as well?
Like I said, we don't actually audit whether the government follows our advice or not, and there's a reason for that, because we don't want this to actually influence our advice. Like, we don't want to self-censor and only advise on what we think they will follow or not. So I just want to make this clear. And the other thing is, we're not involved in policy development other than providing advice on the areas, that are relative to science.
Sorry, so then, assuming this, then you haven't gone back and looked at the policy to decide whether they've taken your advice or not then?
Like I said, we don't audit
Okay.
how the government does. If I may, I just want to say that the research security is a very important and serious issue that goes actually, beyond lists and sensitive technologies. Of course, this is one component, but research security has to be something that happens every day for everything. So it's also the way that we conduct research, the way that we safeguard data in our labs, in our research institutions, the support that we provide to researchers actually for helping them to make sure that their data is not being manipulated and so on.
Yeah,
So,
thank you for that.
we have provided advice on that aspect as well.
Okay. Considering Huawei's collaborations with Canadian universities and its ties to the Beijing governments, what's your view on its absence from the banned entities list?
Mr. President, I honestly think that this is a question that should be directed to others, including institutions and government.
that is a policy question, possibly
Yeah,
more than. Okay.
It's,
Fair enough.
I'm here to provide you with the work that we do, not
so
my
if you don't want to
opinions.
answer, I understand. Then, if you have time, your 2021 to 22 annual report states that the security should not serve as an excuse for turning inward, and the collaboration has often supported peace. Is that something you stand by, even as Canadian research collaboration has been used by foreign regimes to enhance their military capabilities?
I believe that science can be a force for good. I believe in science diplomacy. Doesn't mean that you have to be naive, enter into any collaboration at any price. I think that there are a number of examples I can give of fruitful collaborations between adversaries. I believe that as we speak, and despite the conflict in the Middle East, the Sesame Particle Accelerator where you have people from the different groups, you
Okay,
know,
could
in the
I
Middle
just-
East is
Could I
still
just
working.
interrupt then for a second? In writing, would you be able to provide the committee with the number of times the members of the Government Government Cabinet asked your office for advice from the start of 22 up until now, and the description of what advice they were seeking? If you could provide that to us in writing form, please.
I believe we can do this, Mr. Chair, to the best of our knowledge, of course.
Thank you very much for that. Now we'll go to Mr. Turnbull for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. And maybe just before I begin with questions for you, Doctor, I just will say that the banned entities list that Mr. Soroka was asking about includes post-secondary institutions, and our government has made it very clear that it doesn't apply to companies, but that we have, given guidance based on companies as well, that certain companies should not be funding research. So, getting back to the topic at hand here, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the work you do. We greatly appreciate it. I wanted to ask you a little bit about disinformation, but I wanted to highlight, recently I read an article, I believe it was in the Toronto Star. The study confirms vaccine safety. And I understand it was the largest, most comprehensive study on COVID-19 vaccines, which we know 99 million people were vaccinated. As part of this study, 34 researchers, including Canadian scientists, participated in the study and collaborated on it. And Dr. Jeff Kwong was recently quoted in this article saying the bottom line message is that COVID vaccines are very safe. He also went on, there's a Canada Research Chair that says later on in the article that you don't live your life worrying about being killed by lightning, and you're more likely to be struck by lightning than to have an adverse event. I'm very concerned about the resurgence of polio due to vaccine hesitancy. And I feel like the disinformation in this country that's being disseminated, mostly online, is having an impact on people's health and safety. Could you speak to your knowledge, because I know this is something that you've done a lot of work in, how do we combat that disinformation when the health and safety of Canadians is at stake?
This is, clearly this is a very important question, and I do share the preoccupation about the resurgence of some preventable diseases, not only polio, but others like chickenpox and others. I think this is, science can help us in understanding vaccine hesitancy. Because I don't think that we can lump it all. Everyone, who's hesitant towards vaccines can be lumped in the same sort of bucket. But of course, the absence of proactive engagement to present the data, to inform the public, to understand their preoccupation, leaves a lot of room for disinformation and misinformation, and that's something that is that's very very serious, actually. Earlier, there was a question about actually vaccine, safety and any the vaccine induced, for example, myocarditis. And just want to say that my expert committee during the pandemic actually looked into this. I had a whole bunch of experts from cardiologists to infectious disease, and the data was clear that the chances, the risks of having myocarditis following infection were 10 to 20 times higher than the ones from vaccination. And it's these kind of information that I think that we need to maybe package better for the public and find ways to inform in culturally sensitive ways the public about it, especially vulnerable populations.
Thank you for that answer. And I agree with you that it is about engaging the public and providing information in a way that's consumable, hopefully more easily by the public. But I wanted to ask you one other question. Like, our government, I think, wants to put science and evidence-based research at the heart of the policy-making process. Obviously, you have a key role to play in ensuring that that happens, or in helping to advise on that. Can you tell us how we can better work with you and ensure that that gets embedded in the policy? Like, what my concern is that sometimes science becomes politicized, and I think you're doing your best to make sure it doesn't. I want the longevity to be the case.
But we're over time, so possibly if we could have
Chair,
something in
you've been
writing.
lenient with other people. Can I just ask
No, you're
you-
17 seconds over time. So I'm sorry.
17 whole seconds?
Yeah, sorry. Mr. Blanchet-Jocat for 2.5 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Nimmer, I would like to know, has you or your office been consulted with regard to the recommendations of the advisory board on the system for federal research support system, also known as the Bouchard report? Yes, we were consulted with regard to this. We had discussions with Minister Champagne's office, as well as with the department and other government officials. Thank you. Can you send us your study on Canada's position on the world stage with regard to its competitive edge in science and research? Earlier, you asked me a question about performance indicators, and I wasn't able to give you a full answer. So there are OCDE gradings, there are university gradings, but there are also gradings based on publications in various industries. Australia recently did this kind of study. And if I recall well, and I can send you the study, by the way, it's quite interesting. There are 6 fields in which Canada is still in the top 5 position. Maybe I could ask my colleague how many technologies. Oh, you can send it to us through writing, Dr. Nimmer. I just wanted to get back to this issue on the advisory board panel on federal research support system. And I'm talking about here investments as a share of GDP. You spoke about this earlier. Canada is not at the top of the list. We're actually at the bottom of the list. We're the only G7 countries in the last 20 years that lowered its investments into research and development. And you may have noticed that there's not 1 cent in the last federal budgets for the granting agencies. And there's not an additional cent for the Tri-Council in the next budget either. So I'd like to hear you talk about this. If we're not investing, we're not being competitive, and we are potentially harming our innovation. You spoke about vaccine development earlier. Did you know? Of course, you knew that Canada wasn't the only country that wasn't able to develop its own vaccine against COVID-19.
Again.
Bon, ben, c'est bien.
Sorry, the time is going quickly, but we're getting 17 seconds over time, so I'm trying to keep things rolling. But maybe we can pick it up on your next round. We should have another 3 opportunities for you. Mr. Davies, welcome to our committee. It's great to see you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You've got 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. The annual report of the Chief Science Office Advisor in 2021-22 identified one of your priorities as being augmenting the role of science in Canada's emergency preparedness, and we're advised that your office has done a great deal of work concentrated upon assisting the federal government with pandemic response. I'm wondering if you can share what some of the key lessons are about pandemic response since the emergence of COVID-19.
I think there are many lessons learned in terms of science and science advice, and I think that I would say that on the positive side, Science did inform the decisions. Scientists stepped up to the plate. You know, they were part of many expert committees. At the same time, there were too many expert committees, so it's sort of unsustainable. You know, it's okay maybe if the emergency lasts for a few months, but if it lasts for a few years, then it's another story. So we need to have a better way of doing this. I think that if we look at other countries, they do have a better framework for the provision of science advice to government in cases of emergencies. And I would suggest that we should be looking at, embedding the role of the chief science advisor and their responsibility in emergency preparedness and in the connectivity with the rest of the government. One other thing I will say is that we have, over the past few years, we have put science advisors in several departments, and we're very pleased that the Department of Public Safety has come to the conclusion that having a science advisor in their department would be actually something that's helpful to them, and I think that's a very good development.
Thank you. Speaking of other countries, the British Medical Journal has recommended that Canada conduct a public inquiry into all aspects of the way the federal government handled the COVID-19 pandemic, as the UK has done. As Canada's Chief Science Officer, do you agree that that would be a helpful step?
In all, truthfulness, I haven't considered a public inquiry that's way beyond, I think, my responsibilities. However, I do agree with a review of how well we did in terms of the coordination and prioritization of science, of research and science advice. And it's why we have actually asked Sir Mark Walport to chair a committee that is looking precisely into this.
Thank you. And we're
sorry.
I wish I could turn back the clock, but we are at time again. Mr. McGuire, welcome to our committee. It's great to see you. You've got
Mr. Longfield, yes, and thank you, Dr. Niemer, for your presentation today as well. I had the opportunity of sitting in the Natural Resources Committee a little over a year ago, and I think it was the first time my office contacted you in this regard on the topic of UAPs, unidentified aerial anomalous phenomena. And lots has been written and presented to the U.S. Congress on this topic. Scientists and those experts in that field have been have briefed Congress on this. I know that our Canadian minister has been briefed, some of our persons here as well. Would this be a topic that you would be interested in studying?
Mr. Chair, we have initiated a study on this. We've made it actually public that we are carrying out this study. I must say that it has generated a lot of public interest.
The natural resources, we're looking at why these particular objects, whatever they are, might hover around nuclear facilities. Would think that would be of special interest. I've also seen that in some of the French documents from France as well. Can you comment on any connection that you may have studied or seen in that area, and what sort of, and particularly in the study that you're doing, what sort of things are you studying?
So yeah, perhaps I can briefly summarize what our study is about. What we're doing is we're actually looking at the process by which public reporting of unidentified aerial phenomena actually happens in the country, and making recommendations, if need be, on what should be, if we need to improve on the system, and how best to align our efforts with our allies.
And have you asked any witnesses to come before your committee, or the? Did you meet with, or have you met with any of the people from the U.S. that have been public with the Congress on this?
Yes. So we have. So right now we're actually wrapping up, but we're continuing our contacts with and our exchanges, gathering information both in Canada and outside of Canada. We have spoken with experts. We have spoken, with self-identified experts as well who are working in this area.
Just a couple of quick questions.
Yes.
Has the departments and agencies been forthcoming with the information that you've requested from them? And when will the Sky Canada project be completed and publicly released?
So we have sent questionnaires and information to several departments that we think have been involved over the years or may be involved right now. And I would say at the working level, we have received information from some. The enthusiasm or the response have been uneven. But we haven't taken it a step further. So we'll make sure that we get the information that we need.
Yeah, and as we've seen in Congress, they've started to legislate that the information that they've got should be released. And so will any of your recommendations be about the government transparency and the importance of releasing raw data and information to scientists and researchers here as well?
We're not at the stage of the recommendations yet, but I would just perhaps offer the following, that based on what we have gathered in terms of information so far, I think that there is room for improvement in terms of the gathering, reporting on the information, and also making it available to researchers and to the public. I think that this is the kind of things that if the information, of course, I can appreciate that some, maybe of national security concerns, but I believe that by and large that you can make the information public, and I think that's the best way to mitigate conspiracy theorists and disinformation.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. And do you believe it would be prudent then for parliamentarians to study your recommendations once they're released?
Well, you're of course
free
to study it, but I would certainly feel honored that you've taken one of my studies and given it further study.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire.
Thanks very much.
And Ms. Kayabaga for 5 minutes to finish this round, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also just want to echo my gratitude to the work that you're doing around science, and also thank you for taking the time. Oh, you can't hear me? Okay. Is my mic working? Okay. Bon, c'est bon. Je veux juste aussi...
I also wanted to welcome you to the committee and thank you for all the work that you're doing. You bring a tremendous amount of value to your role.
Back to my colleague's question earlier around different ways that we can make sure that your role is kept in a long term, and how we connect the work that you do in implementing policies with government. And if you can just give me a quick answer, it would be really great.
Well, thank you so much for your interest and really the support of the committee for the role. In one of your earliest reports, I believe you have recommended that the role of the Chief Science Advisor be enshrined in legislation. And it's something that I very much, agree with. I think that this will safeguard the objectivity and the independence of the role. Another, of course, is that we're, as I mentioned, we're developing science advisors in various departments. And I very much believe that the network of science advisors is also a value added for the country and for the government and for Canadians. I think that there needs to be connectivity between also the science advice, perhaps, and the federal science prioritization, if you want, the strategic thinking around science in the country. So, for example, having I will say, whatever, a national advisory council for science, on science and technology, where the science advisor, of course, plays a role, would be something also that would be very significant for the country. And I believe this is something that's been recommended now in 2 reports. So my view is that these are appropriate observations and positive developments for the country when they happen.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's a really good answer, and it kind of connects to my next question. What are the lessons that you think we've learned through COVID, and how do we responsibly get into the innovative AI? I mean, AI is taking over right now, and there's a lot of conversations around COVID and AI. And in terms of countering misinformation and disinformation, I think earlier someone talked about, the lack of information around vaccines and the hesitancy around vaccines. What kind of recommendations would you make to make sure that when we're doing our work and as we advance, technology, we're being responsible and we're implementing policies that directly respond to the lessons that we learned through COVID? Yeah.
Well, it would be, I think, a really missed opportunity if we don't take the lessons learned from the pandemic constructively, that is. If I look in terms of the science and science advice, there was the federal government provided significant investment into research during the pandemic. I think that investment could have been better used if our system was not fragmented. So, we're still going along lines of disciplines, and here we had actually a problem to deal with that required all disciplines and really required a different kind of approach and different kind of prioritization of what needed to be done between the extramural community and also the government scientists. For example, the National Microbiology Lab and others as well. So I think that we need to be to look into how we make these better, these connectivities and these fast decision making, and make sure that we have the tools and the capacity, the human capacity and the physical capacity in the country to respond to emergencies. Because, we talk a lot about the pandemic, but climate emergencies, we have them over and over. Yeah. And of course, they will have effect in terms of health, in terms of displacement of the population, you name it. So it's going to touch on so many different areas. And you need to have an integrated approach where you have science converging into solving the problem in all its dimensions.
So
Thank you. I'm sorry, but we're at time again. That finishes the 3rd round, and we should have time for a complete 4th round if we can keep our time within our limits, starting with Mr. Tucker. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Do you think we should question science?
Science questions itself. The way we improve our knowledge is by questioning what we know, what we don't know, and designing ways to enhance this knowledge and through data gathering and objective means.
Thank you, Dr. Nemer. The questioning of science, and you talked about your study on UFOs right now, and that in the 1960s, people would say those are conspiratists. They're misinformation, that there is no other vehicles. Now we have the Chief Scientific Officer of Canada saying she's studying them. What would you say back to anyone back in the 1960s that had concerns about UFOs?
I think we need to be careful, about revisiting the past, especially when it comes to science. And, we're just not going to start questioning Galileo, right? Actually, there is a Galileo project to scientifically examine the unidentified, aerial phenomena at Harvard.
Yes, Dr. Nemer. There's people that question that we have a flat Earth, and they were stoned to death if they challenged that belief that we're the center of the universe. And now we don't. So thankfully, we do question what we believe to be true, and that's how we either prove what our current belief is, or our new belief would be on what the science has shown. Just to switch gears a little bit, I know only got a few minutes left. In your office, how many consultants do you usually typically hire in a year?
Actually, I think we don't hire consultants. If our expert panel members work pro bono, and that's the scientific culture. Yeah.
So no consultants. And of your staff, are they all back in the office now?
You mean physically?
Yes.
Well, we're following the recommendations of the Treasury Board and Government of Canada, and they're at least in the office 3 days a week.
So everyone in your office 3 days a week is where you're located. Switching gears just a little bit, back to what you study and the order of. So you said that there's a list that you're going to compile of the current studies. Has any of your work that you've done, have you, I guess, admitted to coming to a false conclusion? That after you review something that, you know what, your belief before was wrong and now you have a different take on things? Everyone makes mistakes. When was the last time, I guess, you can say that you made a mistake?
I think this is a difficult question. Perhaps I can help clarify that when we do, for example, a report, we always mention that this is based on the available evidence as of that date, and then if the information changes, then we'll have take another look at it, and that's precisely what we're doing actually just this afternoon with the long COVID. So we've reconvened the expert committee 1 year after we put out the report because it was based on data up until December of 2022. And now there has been developments and we're reconvening, and we will sort of put out I don't know if it's going to be a correction, but an update for sure on where the science is and if there are, further or newer recommendations that we would be providing based on that.
Have you considered studying anything to do with mental health and addictions in Canada? And how science could relate to new treatments or analyzing what we're doing now? Because seemingly a lot of Canadians are worried about addictions.
Yes.
What we are told is the science and the academia that what they're doing in British Columbia should be utilize a liberal drug policy across Canada. And I think there's many Canadians that are questioning the academic analysis that is the smart way to have a drug policy in Canada.
We recognize this is a very important topic. Mental health, substance abuse are very important. We actually, many years ago, considered doing a study on that, but at the time, the Health Canada and the Public Health Agency were doing a study, and we try not to duplicate studies. We take on things that we believe, require more than one department and so on. So I cannot tell you whether we will revisit this or not, but
Okay, thank you.
No,
Thank
they
you.
didn't
Now, Ms.
shut me down.
Dr. Jazik, for 5 minutes, I understand you're splitting time with.
Yes, Ms. Kayabaga will take the first minute or so.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to quickly ask this question around, we're talking about science integrity and transparency. And given that COVID disproportionately impacted racialized communities, like what lessons and what infrastructure does your office think should be in place for the government to better respond for other pandemics and climate change impacts as well, as you mentioned?
Well, thank you very much. This is a very important question, and one on which we had several actually expert committees that included sociologists, psychologists, communication experts, and people from the community. And I think that we need to be engaging with communities, not only in crisis but on an ongoing basis. I think that there's a lot to gain for everyone in doing so. It's one of the recommendations that we have already put out, and probably one that you'll see again in our recommendation in terms of the use of science for emergencies.
Thank you so much for that and that important question, Ariel. Just going back to funding for research activities in Canada. Back in 2017, the year, in fact, you were appointed, Canada's Fundamental Science Review made a number of recommendations. And the one that I'm particularly interested in is a formal coordinating board for Canada's research granting agencies was a recommendation. Now, we've heard that overall, Canada is not spending as much, perhaps, as other OECD countries in terms of research and development. We have, as of course you know, the granting agencies federally. Would it be useful to perhaps have such a formal coordinating board to perhaps create some efficiencies if we are not going to increase the actual budget? Would there be some value in having this recommended coordinating board?
I think this is a very important question, and I would say that we need, to look at what others have done or are doing. I mentioned Quebec recently. They have actually brought together their different granting bodies under one umbrella, which does provide efficiencies, but above all coordination and no gaps for certain fields. I believe that such an approach is also particularly important for what I would call mission-focused research and development activities. Other countries like Germany, like Australia, the Netherlands, the UK have a single agency. So I think that that's definitely something that can and should be considered in the context of better alignment and also minimizing maybe duplications of programs for researchers. Because every time you have a program, you have people applying, but you also have people reviewing. So it's a lot for a small country like ours.
And just to elaborate a little bit on the role of the scientific advisors within each department or within some departments, those individuals report presumably up through the department, but how do they relate to you? Could you just elaborate a little?
Yes, with pleasure. Actually, this was a recommendation, to the government to enhance science advice in government, and it was based on the UK and New Zealand model. So yes, these science advisors are usually seconded from outside of government for a specific period of time on a part-time or full-time basis. It depends. And they do report to the deputy minister of the department, but they work also with myself and my office as part of a network. So what we do together are horizontal. We look after horizontal issues. For example, they were involved in the science workforce, in the science integrity policy. We're developing together some online learning modules for science integrity and science advice. So essentially, it provides departments, but the government in general, with increased deep expertise in different areas.
Thank you.
And
Thank
the
you.
department.
I think we've got the thought. We're getting a lot of thoughts, but over to Monsieur Blanchet-Chocon.
Merci.
2.5 minutes.
Madame Nemer,
Thank you, Dr. Nemer. I want to talk to you about our next study, which will be talking about research funding in higher learning and universities in Canada. Can you speak a bit about this? If I understand your question properly, it's quite a question. I'm wondering, do you think that it's a good idea to have these post-secondary institutions in various places of the country that have I'll add a few details here. Certain witnesses in our previous studies told us, and these were researchers, they told us that very few researchers had access to most of the funding, and that led to a concentration of most of the funding to a very low number of researchers and in a very low number of organizations. As the Chief Science Advisor, do you think this is an issue that is impactful and important in Canada? Probably so. In fact, it probably affects most scientific landscapes. Sometimes success breeds success. We need to ensure that when research projects are assessed, when calls for tenders in research are sent out, there needs to be a concern for diversity and other factors, because if not, there's going to be significant gaps because there will be too little focus on a restrained number of fields. There's this issue also of having echo chambers develop. I was often an outsider in various roles in my career. I worked on the heart, but I hadn't studied the heart specifically. I thought that this was an interesting parallel. It's important. When you talk about diversity, are you talking about diversity at an organizational level? Are you suggesting to spread funding more equitably, that is, to smaller and medium universities instead of the large universities that make the lion's share of research funding? I just want to be clear here. I think that everyone needs additional funding. That includes small and medium-size universities. Institutions need to prosper. They need researchers, and they need researchers who really pave the way for the next generation of researchers and gives them the ability and the desire to do hands-on research, etc.
Pouvez m'écrire,
I could also,
pouvez nous répondre par écrit.
You can answer in writing.
We're 30 plus seconds over.
Je vais
but
prendre la
that was
réponse par écrit, Monsieur le Président.
I know.
I'll take that answer in writing, Mr. Chair.
I also wanted to ask about polytechnics, but I'm maybe I can squeak that in at the end. Mr. Davies, please. For
How much time do you have, Mr. Chair?
2.5 minutes.
Thank you. The Support Our Science has evidence that 62% of Canadian-trained PhD graduates leave the country. What recommendations do you have to stop that brain drain?
We definitely don't want to have a brain drain, but I would just like, I don't know, I'm not aware of exactly the study that you're referencing. I'm not questioning it, but what I just want to qualify is that sometimes it doesn't, it includes people who are leaving the country to train and then come back, or who are going for postdoc, for example, and coming back. So I think a longitudinal analysis of where our trained people go and how many of them come back is very important.
Do you know, Dr. Niemer, what percentage of Canadian-trained PhD graduates leave the country for good?
I don't have this no. Offhand. I hope it's not as high as what we had in the 1990s. We need every talent we can in this country.
Now, the values of the Canada Graduate Scholarship Masters, $17,500, and the Postgraduate Scholarship Doctoral of $21,000 have not changed since 2003. That's over 20 years. The federally funded postdoc fellowship stipend of $45,000 has been constant since 2015. Speaking before this committee, Dr. Sean Koo, a postdoc fellow at the University de Montreal, said, Canada's academic institutions are not competing with other countries for talent. What have you done, or recommendations have you made to get the government to increase these amounts, if any?
I fully support funding graduate student and postdoc at the appropriate level, at a competitive level. I don't think it's good for the country that we have some of our best minds living, under the poverty line. And yes, they will go in other places, which will benefit from them. So I have been very much of a supporter for increasing the value of the scholarships.
Have you made a formal recommendation to government to that effect?
I have.
Thanks. If I can squeeze a quick one in, the Canadian Task Force on Preventative Health Care, which is funded by PHAC, there have been criticisms that they do not include members with subject matter expertise and they don't rely on current scientific data. Are you aware of that issue, and have you looked into that at all?
Just very briefly, we're over time now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Very briefly,
I mean, very briefly, there is a chief scientist at PHAC that's a member of my network of science advisors, and actually she has taken the lessons learned from the pandemic. She set up an expert committee, for example, on avian flu.
Great.
So I'm very encouraged
Thank
by
you.
this.
Thank you. And we have, according to our routine motions, we have space at the end for another conservative round and another liberal round for up to 5 minutes. Or so, who's going to take the conservative? Okay, Mr. McGuire. And looking at the clock, I'm going to need a few minutes myself, so let's make it 4 and 4.
Sure. Just a couple of quick things in regards to what I was speaking about in UAPs earlier, Dr. Nimmer. Do you know when the Sky Project, Sky Canada project will be completed and publicly released?
We have provided, yes, timelines for this. We're about to start, drafting the report while continuing to do the, gathering information, and we should be on track for releasing the report at the end of summer, early fall.
And have you released, or has your office reviewed Government of Canada historical documentation, including previous efforts such as the Project Magnet?
We have gathered a lot of historical information. I think our report is going to be quite fascinating on the historic front. So stay tuned.
Just wondering as well. NAV Canada, which is the receiver of many UAP reports, isn't very transparent. Has the Sky Canada project team sat down with them about how they can release more information for scientific investigations?
I'll have to ask my team if they have sat down specifically with NAVCAN. I cannot, answer this, but we have reached out to and sat down with many of the folks that collect the information right now.
Have any of the departments or agencies flatly rejected giving you information based on the national security or classification concerns?
I don't believe that they have rejected giving us information. Sometimes the information is more complete or more cryptic than would like it to be, which is why in some cases I will be engaging directly with the deputy ministers to make sure that we have the information that we need.
Okay, and has the Sky Canada project spoken with the American UAP office about how they scientifically investigate evidence, such as video and radar, and if so, what have they learned?
We have spoken with several American counterparts, including at the Galileo project that I mentioned earlier, that's looking at this, scientifically with some of the NASA, the chiefs. I've spoken with the chief scientist at NASA and many other individuals who are part of the very active work on UAP in the U.S. I think we've been quite well connected, but we're also connected with the Europeans, like with the French agencies as well.
And have you had any discussions yourself with the government UAP office in the United States?
Not myself on that.
Or your department?
They have with different folks. I'm sorry, I don't remember, the names, but we can certainly, forward them. I can tell you that we're taking this seriously and, speaking with, we want this. Sorry? Oh. I just want to say that, we're taking a very thorough approach to this and making sure that our recommendations will be based on on the best evidence and interactions that we've had.
Thanks, Sue.
And with the last minute, we're going to give it to Maxine for his question.
Merci. Madame Nemer, vous avez élaboré.
Thank you, Dr. Nimmer. You've established a roadmap for open science. Have you already recommended that the government implement an archive bank like France has? We just launched this open science platform for publications that are from, for the moment, for the time being, government researchers, and I hope that eventually they will be open to researchers who do not work for the government and who also use federal government funding money.
Bring us home for 4 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's great to have a little bit more time. Dr. Niemer, thank you again for all your testimony today. I want to go back to misinformation and disinformation because it's something that I know you've said is a threat to science and our democracy. Where do you think disinformation and misinformation is having the biggest impact on Canadians' confidence in science?
Ooh, this is a good question. I don't believe that we have, the kind of data that will allow us to answer your question, appropriately. However, the Canadian Council of Academies has put out a study that suggested that disinformation has actually, during the pandemic, has cost the Canadians actually lives. And a lot of funding and resources as well.
Yeah, I know, like I had mentioned vaccine hesitancy as one of the impacts that it's probably causing. Are there other areas that you can see impacts where disinformation is actually perhaps, acute in the sense that the impact is noticeable and concerning for you?
Well, I think any societal sort of question can become a target for disinformation. And personally, I worry about, for example, disinformation when it comes to the climate adaptation and climate change mitigation. Yeah. Because I think that we just can't, afford to have ongoing disinformation in that area as well.
Yeah, is there any question in your mind about the reality of climate change given the scientific evidence?
You mean whether it's happening?
Yes.
None whatsoever. The data is clear.
So it's 100% from your perspective, it's clear that science says climate change is real?
Yes.
Great. I agree with you. I just wanted to get that on the record. How much more time do I have? 2 minutes. Perfect.
One and a half.
1.5. Oh, you're so generous.
Yeah.
So you had also mentioned about being proactive and how transparency is probably our greatest principle that helps us address disinformation. And you also mentioned involving the public, I think, in response to my earlier question about vaccine hesitancy. How do we encourage the uptake of critical thinking skills and really be proactive? It seems like we need a national campaign of some sort to combat disinformation. Would you agree with that? And what would that look like if you do agree?
I very much agree. I think earlier I wanted to mention science literacy. Didn't get a chance to do it. I think that that's something that we collectively can do. I think it's something that is in the best interest of the country and the population, so that it empowers them to make decisions for themselves and to be able to tell what is real from what is not, and that of course impacts so many decisions in their lives. I think that citizen science is also a very good way of encouraging understanding of what science is and what science is not, and also instilling confidence in the public in terms of the data collection and the data that is being used to justify, certain actions. So I think that we can work on many fronts on this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I did want to sneak in a question on polytechnics and applied science. If you might comment. We've talked a lot about universities. Is there a role that Polytechnics plays with your office?
Anyone that's doing research and science is more than welcome. We've engaged with Polytechnic and with the colleges and with the universities. And I would just like to say that, sometimes we have too much focus on sort of fundamental research versus applied research. And I think that we need to remember what the definition of applied research is. Applied research is research that's aimed at a question. So in this sense, any engineering question, any actually sociology question, any health science question also fits under applied research. So I think in this country, we need to be supportive of all kind of research.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us. The time went really quickly, and thanks to the members for your excellent participation and questions and thoughtfulness. We will be meeting again on Thursday to look at version 2 of the report on impacts of pay gaps at Canadian universities. There's been a little bit of a delay on getting that report to you. I apologize, but we should have it back from translation in a PDF format to get to you early this afternoon. Should we adjourn? Nobody's? Okay. Thank you.